Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really foundational shift in real estate. It's a change so big that if you plan to buy a home, especially here in California, the rules you thought you knew are, well, they're basically obsolete. The whole idea of just casually calling an agent and meeting them at the front door of a listing, that's officially over, replaced by some very strict mandatory contracts.
That's the absolute crux of it. This isn't just more paperwork. It's a mandated formalization of the entire buyer-agent relationship right from the start.
And it seems to be coming from a couple of different places at once.
Exactly. You've got two massive forces colliding. A huge national settlement involving the National Association of Realtors, and then these new state-level laws in California that followed. Together, they've just fundamentally altered how you, the buyer, interact with agents.
So our mission today is to cut through all that complexity. We want to equip you with the knowledge to navigate this new world. We're going to map out the timeline of these changes, define exactly what these new written agreements require, and explain what you need to know before you can even set foot in a property physically or, virtually.
It's all about transparency and making sure you're in control from day one.
Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with the drivers and the timeline. When you look at the sources, it's clear the industry was hit by a really rapid succession of mandates.
That's a great way to put it. The main driver was the National Association of Realtor settlement, the NAR settlement.
Right.
The key change that really rattled everyone came in August 2024. That's when the modified MLS rules went live.
And before that, it was common for the listing agent to just offer a commission to the buyer's agent through the MLS, right? The buyer might not even know what it was.
Precisely. It was basically the seller's agent putting up a bounty for the buyer's agent. That is completely gone. The settlement mandated the elimination of all unilateral offers of compensation between brokers from the MLS.
Okay, so that's a huge structural change.
Huge. And the second major mandate from that settlement, the one that directly affects you, the buyer, was this new requirement for a written agreement between you and your broker before you can tour a property.
And then California jumped on this right away.
Immediately. The California Association of Realtors, CAR, they mirrored this by removing all those broker-to-broker compensation offers from their standard forms.
And then the state legislature got involved.
They weren't far behind. They
Yeah.
realized this needed to be actual law, not just industry rules. So on January 1st, 2025, mandatory statutes went into effect in California. It made these written buyer-broker agreements state law.
But I noticed in the sources there's a third date. Whenever you rush a new law, you get some gray areas, some ambiguities.
You did, and that's exactly why the California Department of Real Estate, the DRE, stepped in. They saw the 2025 laws weren't perfectly clear on a few things.
Like what?
Specifically things like the duration of the agreement and, crucially, what actually counts as a tour. So the DRE drafted a new regulation just to clear up those ambiguities, and that regulation goes into effect January 1st, 2026.
So if you're listening right now, you are literally in the middle of this transition. The MLS rules are in place, the state law is active, and the final clarifications are coming. This isn't a future problem. It's happening now.
Given this new mandatory reality, let's look at the document itself. I mean, this is now a legal contract you have to sign up front.
So who does this apply to? Is it just people buying single-family homes, or is it broader?
It's extremely broad. The law covers all real estate licensees and all property types. We're talking residential, commercial, land, you name it.
So pretty much any purchase.
Any purchase. The only major exclusions are for leases and, services around loan origination. If you're touring properties to buy, this applies to you.
Okay, now let's get to the part everyone really cares about. Compensation. The money.
Right. The agreement has to clearly and unambiguously spell out the negotiated compensation to be paid to the broker. But here's the most critical detail for you, the consumer, that came out of the settlement. The amount in that agreement is the maximum limit.
Wait, maximum limit. Can you walk us through what that actually means? Why is that word maximum so important here?
It's important because it puts the power squarely in the buyer's hands. Let's say you and your agent sit down, you talk, and you agree in writing that your agent's compensation will be 2.5% of the purchase price.
Okay.
That written 2.5% is now the absolute ceiling, the cap.
So what happens if the seller, maybe they're just used to the old way, offers 3% compensation in the listing?
Under the new rule, your broker cannot accept that extra 0.5%. The agreement you signed caps their fee at 2.5%. No additional compensation is allowed, even if the seller offers more.
Wow. So that really is the so what for the consumer. You are no longer paying some fluctuating fee set by the seller. You are negotiating a hard cap on the cost of the service up front.
That's the transparency piece, and the sources are very clear. Oral agreements are completely worthless now.
So if it's not in writing.
It's void and unenforceable. It simply doesn't exist in the eyes of the law. Period.
Okay, so the price is capped. What about the time? How long can an agent lock you into one of these agreements?
That is also strictly regulated to protect you. The term of the agreement cannot be longer than 3 months.
3 months.
And the DRE, in that upcoming 2026 regulation, they clarified this even further. They defined 3 months as exactly 90 calendar days.
That's a great example of them clearing up that ambiguity you mentioned. So it's not 91 or 92 days in a longer quarter. It's just 90.
Exactly. Standardized. And the 90-day clock starts the day after the last person signs. Renewals are allowed, but they have to be voluntary. No automatic renewals. You have to actively choose to re-engage with that agent.
So the goal here seems to be transparency in cost, certainty in duration, and formality in the paperwork.
That's it in a nutshell. I should mention there is one small exemption. It's for what are called non-natural persons, so certain business entities buying property. They're exempt from that 90-day time limit. But for almost everyone listening, the 90-day rule is the law.
Okay, this is where the rubber really meets the road for buyers. You're scrolling online, you see a house you love, you want to go see it right now. The rule says you can't tour without the agreement. So what exactly counts as touring?
Yeah, this is where that 2026 DRE regulation gives us some critical definitions. It clarifies that showing or touring includes both the physical tours, obviously.
Or you walk through the home.
Right, and also virtual tours.
A physical tour is obvious, but virtual touring, does that mean just looking at pictures on Zillow?
No, good question. A virtual showing is defined very specifically. It's when your agent prepares a live or recorded digital walkthrough of the property at your direction. So if your agent is FaceTiming you from the living room, that's a showing. That requires the signed agreement.
So the moment your agent is actively facilitating your access to the property, even digitally, the rule kicks in. And the penalties for agents who break this rule are pretty steep.
They're severe. Under the MLS mandate, there are no exceptions for touring an MLS-listed property without a compliant agreement. You're looking at high fines like $2,500 at some MLSs, and maybe more importantly for the agent, they could forfeit their entire commission.
Well, that guarantees compliance, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Which brings us to a slightly complex legal concept I want to simplify for everyone. The rebuttable presumption.
Okay, rebuttable presumption. Break that down for us.
It's a legal term, but the effect is simple. Under the 2026 DRE regulation, the state operates under the assumption that a buyer representation agreement is obtainable before any tour.
So the system just assumes it's possible to get a signature.
It assumes it's not only possible, but it's the default. So if an agent gets audited and they showed a property without an agreement, the DRE automatically assumes the agent broke the rule. The burden of proof to refute or rebut that presumption is entirely on the agent.
So the agent has to prove they couldn't get it signed.
They have to prove, with documentation, that they tried to get the signature and the buyer, for whatever reason, explicitly refused. The law basically says, we assume you could have gotten it, so if you didn't, you better have proof of why.
That is a huge layer of consumer protection. It forces that professional conversation to happen right at the beginning.
Exactly. Removes all ambiguity.
But there is one key exception we need to cover. Open houses. People rely on those.
Good news on that front. A written agreement is not required for an open house.
And why is that?
Because at an open house, the agent hosting it is not acting as your agent. They are solely representing the seller. The mandatory agreement only kicks in when a licensee is acting as your representative on your behalf.
So the mandatory consultation is the new normal. For the buyer, this means your first real meeting with an agent probably isn't going to be in a car on the way to a house. It's a formal sit-down.
That's right. Agents have to be trained now to explain the why and the what of these new documents. They have to explain that it's required by state law, by MLS rules, by the NAR settlement.
And they have to talk about their fees, their services, and the specific value they bring to the table.
Absolutely. And they must, as you mentioned, make it clear that their commission is negotiable. That's required by law. And a key point for you, the listener, is that you have options for these documents.
Right. It's not one size fits all.
Not at all. The most common one will likely be the buyer-broker agreement, or BRBC. That's for a longer, more committed relationship, often for that full 90-day period.
But what if I'm just starting out, kicking tires? I want to interview a few agents. I don't want to commit to one person for 90 days just to see 3 houses.
And you don't have to. That's where the alternatives come in, like the property showing and representation agreement, or PSRA. An agent should be explaining this to you.
So what's a PSRA?
Think of it as a limited scope agreement. It allows you to formalize the relationship for a much shorter term. Maybe it just covers a specific weekend or a list of 5 specific properties. It lets you comply with the law without that full 90-day commitment.
That clarity is essential, so you can negotiate the scope of the work, not just the fee.
Okay, so let's tackle the most awkward scenario. What if the buyer just refuses to sign anything?
Well, first, the agent cannot tour any MLS-listed property with that buyer. It's a hard stop. And second, because of that rebuttable presumption we talked about, the agent now has a very heavy documentation burden.
They have to create a paper trail.
Immediately. They have to document every attempt to get the signature. They need to write down the reasons the buyer gave for refusing. And best practice is to confirm those reasons in writing with the buyer, a quick follow-up email or text, and save everything. So even a simple text from a buyer saying, "I'm not signing yet," becomes a formal record for the agent's file.
It has to be. The whole process is moving away from verbal promises and toward a verifiable, transparent trail. Brokerages now have to provide ongoing mandatory training for their agents on all of this. Consistency and clear policies are everything.
It's a whole new world.
To summarize this transformation, the market has completely moved from, implied agency or vague verbal agreements to mandated, documented, fully transparent agreements. As a buyer, you should now expect a formal conversation about representation, value, and compensation before you even think about seeing properties.
And you know that the compensation you agree to is the explicit maximum fee. That gives you real negotiating power.
It does.
It's really interesting, this whole transition period from 2024 through 2026, it seems to be about building a framework that protects the consumer. It clarifies who works for whom, and it standardizes how they get paid.
It puts the value proposition of the agent front and center well before you ever fall in love with the kitchen.
Right. So since the written agreement has to be signed as soon as practicable, and oral agreements are totally void, the question for every prospective buyer now is this. By forcing you to formalize your representation and negotiate a compensation cap before the first tour, does this shift fundamentally change how you evaluate your agent, turning them from a casual chauffeur into a compensated, documented, and very carefully chosen partner?